this video, we're going to explain how to structure your literature review chapter step by step. We'll unpack each of the sections to help you write the best literature review in the most time-efficient way. If you're new to the oftentimes intimidating world of academic research, be sure to hit that subscribe button for loads of plain language, actionable advice, and tips covering all things research related. Also, if you're working on a dissertation or thesis, check out our free collection of easy-to-use chapter templates to fast-track your research project. You can find the link to those in the description. If you'd prefer one-on-one support, check out our private coaching service, where we hold your hand throughout the research process step by step. You can learn more about that and book a free initial consultation at gradcoach.com. Right, with that out of the way, let's jump into it. As with all parts of the research process, it's important to understand the why before you start working on the literature review chapter. As we discussed in our literature review how-to video, you can find that here. A good literature review needs to achieve a few important objectives. Specifically, it should demonstrate your knowledge of the research topic. In other words, show that you're up to date regarding the current state of knowledge in the research area. Identify the gaps in the literature and show how your research links to one of these. And provide the foundation for your conceptual framework, if you plan to have one, of course. So keep these objectives front of mind as you write up your literature review. Even the best structure won't be of much help if you don't clearly address these points. Conversely, a good structure will help highlight how you've addressed each of these and make life a little easier for your reader and marker. Right, so let's look at the basic structure of a literature review. As with all chapters in a dissertation or thesis, the literature review chapter needs to include an introduction or opening section, a body where most of the word count will be, and a conclusion or concluding summary. Let's unpack each of these. As the opening section of your chapter, the introduction needs to start off by stating the purpose of the chapter. That is, to review and synthesize the existing literature in relation to your research aims. This might seem a bit odd, since your reader will most likely already know what a literature review is, but as I mentioned earlier, you need to demonstrate to your marker that you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So start off with a line or two clearly stating the purpose of the chapter. Next, you'll need to briefly outline your topic, including any tricky terminology or jargon. The objective here is to give the reader a quick reminder of your topic, or an overview if they haven't read the preceding chapter. So don't go into too much detail. A paragraph is just fine. In this section, you should also state the scope of your literature review. In other words, what you will and won't be covering and why. Clearly defining your scope will help ring-fence your literature review and achieve a clear focus. The clearer and more narrow your focus, the deeper you can dive into the topic, which is key to earning marks. So don't be afraid to have a tight scope. Lastly, you'll need to provide a brief outline of the layout and structure of the core content, which will be in the body of the section, up next. The objective here is to give your reader a feel of what's coming up and a big picture view of the discussion to help them understand how it all fits together. For this section, a little visualization can go a long way. Here's an example to give you an idea of what this could look like. As you can see, this figure provides an easy-to-understand snapshot of the chapter layout so that the reader and marker can easily see how you're organizing the discussion. Depending on the nature of your project, you could also present your stance or point of view at this stage. In other words, after working your way through all the literature, you'll likely have an opinion about what the trends and concerns are in the field, as well as what's lacking. The introduction section can then be used to lay a foundation for these core ideas and concepts, so that it's clear how your project connects with existing research. Right, with the introduction laid out, it's time to get into the meat of the literature review, the body section. The body of your literature review is the beating heart of your literature review chapter. This is where you'll present analyze, evaluate, and most importantly, synthesize the existing research. In other words, this is where you're going to earn or lose the most marks. So it's important to think carefully about how you'll organize your discussion to present it in a clear way. Importantly, the body of your literature review needs to synthesize the existing research in relation to your research aims, objectives, and questions. In other words, your golden thread. So when thinking about how to structure your literature review, you need to think about which structural approach will provide the best review for your specific type of research. If you're unclear about what your specific research aims are, you'll need to first get clarity on that. For more info, check out our Golden Thread video to help you pin down your focus. You can find a link to that in the description. All right, so let's look at these structural options. There are, broadly speaking, 3 options for organizing your literature review, namely thematic, chronological, and methodological. Let's look at each of these. The first option for structuring the body section of your literature review is the thematic approach. As the name suggests, this approach involves organizing your body discussion by theme or category. As you've been collecting and synthesizing literature, you'll likely have started seeing some themes or patterns emerging. You can then use these themes or patterns as a structure for your discussion. For example, if you were researching which factors contributed towards people trusting an organization, you might find themes such as the perceptions of an organization's competence, benevolence, and integrity. Using the thematic approach, you could then structure your literature review's body section to discuss each of these themes, one section at a time. So you discuss all the literature that focuses on competence as one group, then move on to the literature that discusses benevolence as another, and so on. The thematic approach is the most common approach and is particularly useful for structuring literature reviews where the research aims involve identifying factors that contribute to an outcome or variables that fit into a conceptual framework or model. It can also be useful for highlighting contrasting viewpoints in the literature, as you can group the discussion by proponents and opponents of a specific viewpoint. Next up, we have the chronological approach. With this approach, you start with the literature that was published first and work your way through until you reach the work that was published most recently. For example, if a student of politics is investigating how the understanding of democracy has evolved over time, they could use the chronological approach to provide a narrative that demonstrates how this understanding has changed through the ages. The benefit of the chronological option is that it makes it easy to discuss the developments and debates in the field as they emerged over time. Organizing your literature chronologically also allows you to highlight how specific articles or pieces of work might have changed the course of the field. In other words, which research has had the most impact. Therefore, this approach is very useful when your research aims involve understanding how the topic has developed over time, and is often used by scholars in the field of history. Of course, in some ways, chronology is a factor regardless of how you decide to structure your literature review, because you'll always, to a certain extent, be analyzing how the literature has developed. However, with the chronological approach, the emphasis is very firmly on how the discussion has evolved over time, as opposed to how all the literature links together, which is the focus of the thematic approach. The final option we'll cover here is the methodological approach. As the name suggests, with this approach, you'll structure your literature review discussion based on the research methodologies, or methodological approaches, used. This could mean structuring your discussion based on whether the methodological approach was qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methodologies, or whether studies used a specific data collection or analysis method. Structuring your literature review by methodology can be useful if you're drawing research from a variety of disciplines and are critiquing different methodologies. The point of this approach is to question how existing research has been conducted, as opposed to what the conclusions and/or findings of the research were, although these could, of course, be connected. As you can see, the right structural approach depends largely on what you're trying to achieve with your research. In other words, what your research aims, objectives, and research questions are. As I mentioned earlier, if you're unclear about what your specific research aims are, you'll need to first get clarity on that. Be sure to check out our video covering this golden thread to help you pin down your focus. Whichever structural approach you decide on, you'll need to make sure that your discussion achieves the purpose of the literature review, the why, that we discussed earlier. In other words, you need to clearly demonstrate your understanding of the current state of knowledge by reviewing and synthesizing the literature. You also need to clearly highlight the research gap, or gaps, and clearly explain how this links to your specific research so that your project is firmly rooted in the literature. Right, with the core of the body of the literature review out of the way, let's move on to the final piece of the puzzle, the conclusion. Now that you've presented your core discussion, you'll need to wrap up your literature review and pull all the pieces together to set the direction for the rest of your dissertation or thesis. The conclusion is where you'll present the key findings of your literature review. In other words, the most important takeaways that your reader needs to be aware of. In this section, you should emphasize the literature that is especially relevant to your research questions and highlight the gap in the literature that your project will address. Based on this, you need to make it clear what you will add to the literature. So basically, you need to justify your own research by showing how it will help fill one or more of the gaps you just identified. Last but not least, if you plan to develop a conceptual framework, the conclusion section is a good place to present this. This framework can also be a useful way to summarize the key insights from the literature, especially if you're investigating potential factors that influence an outcome. Here's an example of a conceptual framework that outlines potential variables following on from their discussion in the body section of the literature review. Even if your study doesn't involve developing a conceptual framework, you might still want to consider using some sort of visual aid to summarize your chapter. After reading thousands of words in your literature review chapter, your reader and marker will be grateful for a little visual support to help tie all the concepts and arguments together. Also, some readers will only read the intro and conclusion section while skimming through the body. So this summary will help communicate the essence of your lit review. All right, so that wraps things up for today. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and leave a comment. For more videos, be sure to check out the Grad Coach channel and subscribe for plain language, actionable research tips and advice every week. Remember, if you're looking for one-on-one support, be sure to check out our private coaching service, where we hold your hand throughout the research process step by step. You can learn more about that and book a free initial consultation at gradcoach.com.